The concept of online fandom culture on Tumblr has always fascinated me because I'm very active on the site and I have been joining online communities since I was 13. But what especially fascinates me is the idea of ship wars and how seriously some fans take it and why. So for this project, I wanted to not only talk about online fandom culture and ship wars, but bring in concepts that I have learned during my undergrad as a cinema studies student, like the culture industry, Paratexts, and the theories of paranoid and reparative reading in order to better understand this particular area of the internet. In this video, I would be focusing on the Shadow and Bone fandom because it's the most recent one I've joined, and it's the one that really made me go, wow, do I still want to be a part of this fandom or not? So without further ado, here's my video essay on online fandom culture, virtue signaling, and paranoid reading in the Melina versus Darklina ship wars in Shadow and Bone. Being involved in online fandom culture on Tumblr can provide a sense of community and connection with others of shared interest. The Shadow and Bone fandom started off as a book fandom, but since the books were adapted into a show by Netflix, the fandom has grown larger due to a wider audience reach. Tumblr allows for the following: sharing of content like gift sets and fanfiction, a prolongation in immersing in this fictional series through those paratextual objects, and finally, opportunities to discuss analyses of various scenes and characters through text posts. At first glance, it seems as if the fandom culture takes place of the culture industry, dictating the correct way to consume media, but that is not necessarily the case. The culture industry is much broader than fandom culture, and it does provide the gateway, if you will, into fandom culture by providing you with the media to consume. Fandom culture, on the other hand, is about being on the inside and focuses more on dealing with analysis and discourse, as well as creating paratexts that would then shape how newer members of the fandom would understand the show and the characters' dynamics with one another. Tumblr fandom culture sometimes has a tendency to engage in moral outrage and performative self-righteousness or virtue signaling when it comes to ships, dictating the right ships, in the case of the Shadow and Bone fandom, Melina over Darklina, and shaming those who ship the wrong ship. This moral outrage, moral superiority, and virtue signaling can be rather toxic when engaged with. In this video, I will go more in depth about the culture industry and online fandom culture in order to better understand how these work in relation to one another. Then I will explain the concept of paratext and give examples in the context of fandom. Finally, I will analyze some of the Tumblr posts in regards to the shipping war and answer the questions. What was going on for me when I was scrolling and seeing these posts about shipping wars and shaming those who ship the other pairing? How can I negotiate my relationship to this fandom, especially when there is this toxicity involved? And finally, what does a reparative reading of Shadow and Bone look like in the context of fandom? Let's begin with the culture industry. This is anything mass-produced for entertainment, films, TV shows, and even books. According to Adorno and Horkheimer, the culture industry is about infecting and producing sameness. Everything is essentially the same thing being produced over and over again, just in a different packaging. An example would be the Shadow and Bone and Percy Jackson books. Seemingly different, but they have the same chosen one trope and the same hero's journey storyline. The culture industry is also all about marketability. The love triangle trope is a well-known one, and they do it to have more fans engage with the text. They would market both sides of the love triangle so that regardless of whether you're on one team or the other, you're getting a little bit of both in the text. An example of this would be the Team Edward versus Team Jacob phenomenon during the Twilight era. Even though you know that Edward and Bella were going to end up together, Team Jacob fans were still watching the films for a little bit of Jacob and Bella scenes. It's the same thing with Shadow and Bone. This love triangle is pretty much the exact same as Twilight, with the best friend and the immortal love interest, just packaged differently. The culture industry then is very broad. It doesn't require specialization, but it does act as the gateway for fandom culture. Another point that Adorno and Horkheimer bring up was that the spectator must need no thoughts of his own. The culture industry doesn't want you to think critically. It wants you to be passive and mindlessly consume the media it feeds you. And so it's almost like a spectrum in relation to online fandom culture. The culture industry doesn't want you to think, so it's on one end, while online fandom culture will require you to think critically and analyze, so it's on the other end. So what is online fandom culture? It's a combination of internet and fandom culture. Internet culture is all about making yourself look good. Gia Tolentino talks about this and gives examples: looking hot and well-traveled on Instagram, making righteous political statements on Twitter, to name a few. Then she actually mentions this concept called virtue signaling. It's defined on Google as the action or practice of publicly expressing opinions or sentiments intended to demonstrate one's good character or the moral correctness of one's position on a particular issue. Tolentino says that this behavior makes communication about morality very easy, but makes actual moral living very hard. This applies to Tumblr and cancel culture. People do this virtue signaling all the time. Do we truly know if they are morally correct in real life? No, we don't. But as it stands, it's becoming more important to come off as morally correct online in order to not be cancelled or shamed for being incorrect. Fandom culture then is about being on the inside. According to Henry Jenkins, an individual's socialization into fandom often requires learning the right way to read as a fan. This idea of the right way involves analysis and criticism. So as mentioned, it's on the other end of the spectrum. The culture industry doesn't want you to think, while the fandom culture wants you to think and even dictates the right way for you to consume the text. Jenkins also describes the idea of fandom becoming a participatory culture, that it transforms the experience of media consumption into the production of new texts. So fandom is not just mindlessly consuming the media, but also producing new meanings through paratexts, a concept that I'll explain in depth in a few. Fandom is also endlessly critiquing and reworking the canonized text, and doing this gives one a sense of superiority, that you're not just mindlessly consuming the media like other spectators. We like to feel smart, and when you can analyze and point things out that others didn't notice, it gives you that feeling of superiority. I've mentioned paratexts a couple of times, but what exactly are they? According to Jonathan Gray, they tell us what to expect, and in doing so, they shape the reading strategies that we will take with us into the text, and they provide the all-important early frames through which we will examine, react to, and evaluate textual consumption. In other words, it shapes the way we would receive the text in question. Examples of common paratexts include trailers, the book if there's a film or show adaptation, and even this. Just scrolling through a tag and seeing the gift sets and text posts are all examples of paratexts. Even if you haven't seen the show, you can get an idea of what it's about just by browsing through the tag. Fandom isn't just about sharing content like fanfics or gift sets. They also share analyses. Take this for example. Because Tumblr has no character limit for posts, fans can write essays defending their favorite character, in this case the Darkling. Apart from analyses and defense of their favorite character, some people also make posts criticizing how other fans treat or interpret different characters, like in this post. These kinds of posts would shape how new members or even those who just happen through the tag perceive Mal and the Darkling's characters. Now, Tumblr is a very visual site and is probably best known for gift sets. Louisa Ellen Stein discusses that gift sets function as being similar to fan remix combination, juxtaposition, and collision. Through image combinations, gift sets offer particular character studies and highlight repeated imagery in a given series. While a lot of gift sets are used in such fan edits, some gift sets are also usually focused on the gift set creator's favorite moments from the show and are often done out of context. Here's a gift set of the Darkling and Elena when he goes back in for a kiss. It's cute and it strongly implies that they are into each other. Here's another gift set of Mal and Elena. There's no dialogue or even text added, but you can infer from the way they're smiling and talking that they're very comfortable with each other. You can infer a lot then from gift sets even without knowing the context of the scene or even the show as a whole. Another thing that Stein talks about was the notes and reblogs on posts, how having tens and thousands of notes gives them the weight of community-held beliefs or community-hailed icons. The more notes or reblogs of a post, the more weight it carries because it strongly implies that thousands of people like this or agree with the post. This is true not just for gift sets, but also in terms of text posts that contain analyses or essays about different characters or even fandom etiquette. In this final part, I will be talking about the ship war between Darklina and Melina, specifically focusing on the behaviors of antis. Antis are fans who are strongly against a character or ship. Some Melina fans are anti-Darklina, while others aren't. Same goes for Darklina fans. I don't engage in ship wars, nor am I overly invested in it. Most of my interactions with these types of posts when I first joined the fandom was through the general Shadow and Bone tag. Because I needed to look for posts for this video, I had to purposefully scroll through the anti-Darklina tag, and here are some of the posts I have encountered. So this user is making a post and outright saying that they judge you if you ship Darklina because they are problematic due to the age gap. This one uses Regina George from Mean Girls as a reaction image, again bringing up the problematic age gap and even talking through the tags for more of their input, judging the Darkling for trying to get with Alina when she's the same age as Mal, while calling Mal a child. This post lists not only the reasons as to why they think that Darkling is evil or problematic, but also shames the way Darklina shippers interpret the Darkling's character. The next post is similar to the one before it, although it's more explicitly shaming Darklina fans for the way they analyze his character. And finally, this post not only shames Darklina fans, but also claims that shipping fictional characters in an abusive relationship has real-world consequences. So the main thing that anti-Darklina fans focus on is presenting Darklina as an abusive relationship, especially due to the age gap, and they shame those who ship these two fictional characters together. I have many thoughts about this, which I'll go more in depth about later on in this video. Now, I will be scrolling through the anti-Melina tag and see what the other side has to say. In this post, the user is more against the shippers than they are against the ship itself, even if they're not a fan of the ship, calling them sanctimonious because they present themselves as morally superior due to liking a less problematic ship. This next post is a user compiling a very long list of things that they hated about Mal's character in the books, including but not limited to slut-shaming, toxic masculinity, and entitlement. They really hate Mal because this list is long. Moving on then. This user is not necessarily an anti-Melina, more of an anti-Melina shipper. They're pointing out the behavior of anti-Darkling fans, who I've mentioned can be Melina shippers, and how they would send hate to Ben Barnes, the actor who plays the Darkling. Even though the Darkling is a character that he plays, they don't want to separate Ben Barnes from that character. He's the face of the character, which is why they send hate to him. This final anti-Melina post is against the relationship because of their codependency and pointing out how unhealthy it is. So overall, the anti-Melina team is more against the attitudes of the pro-Melina team, but then there are a few whose problems with the ship is in regards to the characters' codependency on each other. Regardless of whether it's anti-Darklina or anti-Melina, these posts are examples of paranoid reading. According to Eve Sedgwick, paranoia is a theory of negative affects. These negative affects are more about avoiding or forestalling pain, or essentially seeing the worst and most problematic things within the text, or in this case, the ship. Another point Sedgwick brings up was what Peter Solter-Dijic discusses, which is this idea of enlightened false consciousness that represents the universally widespread way in which enlightened people see to it that they are not taken for suckers. So these anti-Darklinas would pride themselves on reading from a paranoid or defensive position, so as to claim that they're not at all fooled by the Darkling and Ben Barnes' good looks, and see him as an evil character. The paranoid reading of the Darklina ship appears to have some connection to virtue signaling. They are so vocal about the ship being immoral, problematic, and wrong, and are vocal about being against it to demonstrate that they are morally superior than those who like the Darklina relationship. The anti-Melina team also engages in the same paranoid reading, trying to find the absolute worst qualities in the ship so that they're also not taken for suckers. That just because Mal is presented as the good guy best friend, that he's not really a good guy, nor is his relationship with Alina healthy. Now that we have established all that, let's go back to one of the questions I presented in my introduction. How did this make me feel? I mentioned before that I would only encounter the occasional ship war post when I would scroll through the general Shadow and Bone tag. So for this project, I had to scroll through the anti-tags in order to find the posts that demonstrate the paranoid reading, and virtue signaling done by members of the fandom. It was stressful, but mostly exhausting. I had to stop several times and exit the website just to take a breather. Even when the occasional post would pop up in the general tag, it's draining having to read all the reasons why someone hates the ship or this character. Now, there's nothing wrong with engaging in paranoid reading, but doing it all the time takes the pleasure out of the text. I just want to enjoy the show, and I do enjoy reading in-depth analyses about the dynamics between other characters, mainly the crows. I prefer analyses that focus on the characterization without bashing other characters. A good chunk of the fandom does that, but like everything in life, there's always a very loud minority of antis who are so invested and so immersed in this fictional series that they feel the need to make posts and spam the tags with their opinions on why they hate character X or character Y. Personally, I like Dark Lena and am indifferent towards Melina. Ben Barnes is hot, so is Jessie Maylee. I like their chemistry, but I don't want to have to defend myself or feel like I have to defend myself whenever I see these shaming posts by anti-Dark Lenas. So here's a post where someone, a Dark Lena shipper, talks about not having to defend yourself for your choice of ship. The shaming that these Dark Lena shippers receive is bad enough that they feel the need to put a disclaimer before every post, just so they won't be attacked or shamed by anti-Dark Lenas. That brings me then to the final two questions I have left to answer. How can I negotiate my relationship to this fandom, especially when there is this toxicity involved? And finally, what would a reparative reading of Shadow and Bone look like in the context of fandom? What I ended up doing is I stopped scrolling through the tags, specifically the general Shadow and Bone tag, so I won't have to see anti-posts. I also limited myself to following only content creators, specifically those who create gift sets. I also use that very functional and beautiful block button if I ever encounter anti-ship or anti-character posting. Furthermore, when I was scrolling through the tags for this project, I found this post that helped me come to terms with my relationship with the fandom. This user is listing everything I was thinking when I was scrolling through the tags, and this specific point. Fandom is escapism, not activism. Actually, it really resonated with me, and I'll probably keep reminding myself of that whenever I join a new fandom in the future. Also, the point about being ship wars being stupid, I agree. The culture industry urges it by marketing Team A and Team B in love triangles to make money and drive engagement, while fandom culture makes it about morality and which ship is less problematic. As the user said, ship and let ship. My final point will be on the reparative reading of the show and what it would look like in the context of fandom. Reparative reading, according to Sedgwick, is about pleasure and making it better or more tolerable. So it's the opposite of paranoid reading. Paranoid reading is defensive, but reparative reading is more hopeful and allows you to be surprised and enjoy something while not expecting the worst. Sedgwick also mentions that the vocabulary for articulating any reader's reparative motive toward a text or a culture has long been so sappy, aestheticizing, defensive, anti-intellectual, or reactionary. The way I understood this passage from Sedgwick is that reparative reading doesn't seem nearly as intellectual as paranoid reading appears to be, but there's nothing wrong with aestheticizing a text or at least allowing yourself to find pleasure in it. While I was scrolling through the general tag for Shadow and Bone, I came upon this post that talks about the portrayal of various ships in the show. This is an example of a reparative reading of the ships. There's no judgment of ships and no bashing. The user managed to find the beauty in all of the ships' portrayal on the show. Other ways to reparatively read Shadow and Bone would be to enjoy and find pleasure in the world building, as well as appreciate the chemistry and dynamics of the characters and actors, or even the casting choices, which personally I loved. Or alternatively, Sedgwick mentions how reparative reading is also about making it better or tolerable. A lot of fans would write fix when they don't like how the story ends or where it goes. They take it upon themselves to change the ending or trajectory of the story, especially when it comes to their ship. Spoiler alert, Dark Lena doesn't get a happy ending, so a lot of fanfics on sites like AO3 are about changing that ending. And this is just one of the many ways the show can be read in a reparative manner in the context of fandom. To reiterate my main points, the culture industry and online fandom culture operate on two different ends of a spectrum. The culture industry doesn't require you to think critically, but online fandom culture requires criticism, analysis, and discourse when interacting with a text. Online fandom culture creates paratexts such as gift sets and analyses on text posts that would shape how newer members and even non-members of the fandom would perceive different characters and different dynamics in Shadow and Bone. Ship wars between the anti-Melenas and anti-Darklenas are an example of paranoid reading and virtue signaling. Each anti-team reads the relationship from a paranoid and defensive position in order to virtue signal. The anti-Darklenas pride themselves on not supporting a relationship they deem abusive, in part due to the large age gap between the characters, while the anti-Melenas pride themselves on not supporting a relationship they deem unhealthy due to the characters' codependency on one another. Having to witness the ship war has made me negotiate my relationship with the fandom. I stay out of tags and limit who I follow, and block those who post anti-things. While I can understand the antis wanting to read the show from a paranoid position, I choose to read the show reparatively, to appreciate the chemistry of the characters with one another, and to appreciate the choice in casting and the world building. Other fans engage in other ways of reparative reading, primarily by writing fix-it fanfiction that changes the text ending or trajectory, improving upon the aspects of the text that they didn't like, especially in concern with their ship. In closing, I leave you with this. If all you ever do is criticize and engage in paranoid reading, how would you find enjoyment and entertainment? There's no such thing as a morally pure piece of media. It's up to us to learn when to criticize and engage in paranoid reading, and when to read from a reparative position and find enjoyment in the text.